Welcome to the Pharma Podcast, conversations with industry experts and business leaders about important and current topics in Canadian pharma, biotech, and medtech. I'm your host, Sam Tarantino. On this episode of the Pharma Podcast, my guest is Raj Indupuri, CEO of eClinical Solutions. Raj and I will explore the build versus buy pendulum. Should CROs buy technology capabilities or should they develop them in-house? Raj, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Sam, for having me. I'm excited to be here, considering my background and what we do at eClinical Solutions.
So, hey, before we discuss the challenge, the build versus buy pendulum faced by CROs, let's start by telling us about yourself and eClinical Solutions.
Yes. So I've been very fortunate to be in this industry or in the life sciences space for more than 24 years. And I started my career as a clinical database developer, a programmer, and helping build databases or trial databases and helping with data acquisition and also helping different stakeholders extract value out of this data. And over the years, I progressed my career by working at both service providers and also on the sponsor side, on the biotech side. So really fortunate to be in this space for a long time. And more recently, since 2012, so I've been one of the founders and the CEO of eClinical Solutions. And at eClinical, we provide both data services and software to solve several industries challenges, specifically the data challenges, and with an intent to help sponsors of the industry modernize clinical trials and help with the digitization efforts and to help with digital trials.
So help define the challenges CROs are facing with the build versus buy pendulum, as you call it.
Yeah, I think we all can agree that technology is a key enabler in terms of digitization or in terms of conducting or managing modern clinical trials. And CROs have been playing a very critical role, helping the industry over the past 2 decades or so, or more than that, with research. And we have seen with COVID how incredible it was to that the industry was able to bring vaccines and also treatments at incredibly short timelines, right? And that again demonstrates that there are bold new ways to expedite research, and there are several lessons that we have learned from the successes that we have seen from some of these companies bringing vaccines and treatments to help with the pandemic, right? So for CROs, there is now significant pressure from sponsors and other stakeholders, even regulatory bodies and everyone involved with research to reduce cycle time significantly, right? To expedite trials in general, reduce inefficiencies, because overall R&D cost for years and decades have been significantly high, and CROs are under immense pressure, again, like I just said, to evolve and reduce cycle times, be more efficient. And the only way that it's possible is by adopting more modern and advanced technologies and evolving by leveraging more new ways to do research.
For our audience, would you mind defining a CRO? Some in our audience may not know what CRO stands for and what they do.
Yeah, definitely. CRO at high level is a clinical research organization, and like I mentioned earlier, CRO plays a vital role helping overall the industry with clinical development. If I'm a smaller or maybe even larger companies, right? So companies chose to obviously keep the science, which is their core competency in-house, but often partner with service providers to different aspects of research or all parts of the clinical development. So the CRO industry in general has been growing rapidly and has been playing a significant role in bringing or helping industry, biotech and pharma and med device companies to bring therapies and treatments much faster.
So, what new demands, challenges are we seeing in the life sciences industry for CROs?
That's a great question. So, like I just mentioned, right? So there is significant pressure from life sciences companies requiring CROs to reduce the cycle times, right? In terms of the time it would take to build a database or clean or the data, right? I'm talking more from the data aspect of it, in terms of the time needed to submit to regulatory bodies, right? And also there's always cost pressures, right? So for years, the industry has been trying to eliminate inefficiencies with R&D, which has been quite expensive. So one of the reasons the CR industry has been rapidly growing is to provide more cost-efficient way to do research, and there's always under pressure, again, to reduce costs and deliver at speed, right? So that actually leads to more pressure to CROs to evolve and again take advantage of modern technologies to achieve these outcomes.
Mm-hmm. So, how are you solving some of these data challenges?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned earlier, eClinical Solutions, we are a service and a software provider. On the software side, we have a platform, Illuminate. It's a data analytics platform which enables you to bring data from any source, any structure, any format into one central hub, provides a very seamless way to transform this raw data into something meaningful, whether it's for insights, whether it's for cleaning, whether it's for standardization to support submission, right? It could be multiple use cases. So we have been helping clients, including CROs, to modernize their data infrastructure that will, in fact, help with the outcomes that I talked about earlier, whether it's reducing inefficiencies or reducing cycle times and overall reducing the costs that's needed to conduct and manage a clinical trial.
So how are CROs, in your opinion, responding to the increased variety of data from multiple sources?
Yeah, another great question. So science has been groundbreaking, right? We have seen that with what happened with the pandemic and how the industry has responded. But over the past 2 decades or so, even though there was a lot of innovation that has happened, a lot of tech companies that actually are helping the industry or part of the industry, but there's not a lot of transformation that has happened, right? And even before the pandemic, there was a lot of investment that's happening in the industry to transform, and so this transformation required for companies to come up with modern data strategies, that required companies to think about modern data technologies, right? And at the same time, trials have been getting extremely complex, and which was leading into more and increased number of data sources being collected by every trial. So with advancement in science, with the complexity of trials being increased, the data problem continued to increase as well. And the only way for sponsors or CROs to solve this problem is by modernizing the data infrastructure and also by investing in digital transformation initiatives. The challenge with CROs is when compared to a sponsor is more complicated, because when I'm a sponsor, when I'm a biotech company, I actually am dealing with data for X number of trials, right? There is some kind of standardization. It makes it a little bit easier to deal with the data pipeline and the ingestion, mapping, and automation and analytics. But if I'm a CRO, I'll be working with multiple companies, and even though there was a lot of progress that has been made in the industry with standards adoption, there are always nuances and how research is done across sponsors or across companies. That adds additional complexity for CROs to deal with this diversity, and the diversity of data becomes more complex, and it's very challenging to deal with this unless you're adopting modern technologies, which leads to whether you build internally or whether you buy or work with other partners and software providers.
So let's talk about decentralized trials. Let's, for the audience, maybe define a decentralized trial versus a centralized trial, and how are CROs responding to decentralized trials?
Yeah. So this is a trend that we've been talking for years. When you talk about decentralized trials, again, it's a different type of a model where you're bringing research to patients, right? Traditionally, when you talk about a clinical trial, you actually have patients going to sites or hospitals, right? And that adds a lot of it's inefficient in terms of whether it's cost, whether it's also an ability to do research efficiently, and also it's inconvenient for patients at the end, right? So with decentralized trials, the whole idea is at a very higher level, bringing research to patients in a decentralized way or in a virtual way, where in this model, you are now collecting data directly from patients, right? Whether using devices or apps and other digital ways, right? It doesn't mean that the site or the role of the site is completely going away. They still play a huge role, but in terms of how you collect, monitor, and manage your trial changes significantly, because now you actually are having more direct interactions with patients. And an example again being in the decentralized trial model, you would be collecting more and more data directly from patients using device or apps. These are connected devices, right, from the patients. And that adds, again, increases the complexity in terms of how a CRO would now have to deal with larger volumes of data and more variety of sources of data.
Mm-hmm. So what are the advantages for CROs in buying technology platform versus developing them in-house, and what are the disadvantages?
So this is an interesting question, right? And this is just not at CROs. We get asked from the sponsors or perspective as well, buy versus build. But if I'm a CRO, and I'll separate into two segments, the mid-size CROs and the larger ones. If I'm a mid-size CRO, it makes absolutely no sense to build. And in other words, I don't think there are any advantages whatsoever to build. And the reasons being similar to how science and research has become extremely complex, software development and software delivery has become incredibly complex as well, right? There's significant advancements over the past few years on the software side, and especially on the data analytics side, that has happened. And unless it's your core competency, it will be incredibly challenging to build software that's very efficient, delightful to use, and that's scalable, right? In other words, over the past few years, there's significant advancements made with cloud computing, AI and machine learning, in terms of rich user interfaces, right? So it requires significant R&D efforts, right, and investment to build modern or advanced software to deal with the data problems that we have been talking about. And the cost simply is so pay from my perspective, right? It for mid-size CROs, I would say it's almost a non-starter, right? And and in terms of the advantage for these mid-size CROs, right, to partner with software providers is several, right? One, with a significantly lower cost, you're able to adapt or implement software, and you could do it at your own pace. You can always start small in an agile way, achieve value, right, and then grow. Two, you don't need to be worried so much about innovating, because as we have seen, right, research continue to evolve. We talked earlier in terms of how expectations have changed, whether it's stakeholders, which is patients, or whether it's regulatory bodies, whether it's sponsors, right? So as trials continue to evolve, you need to make sure you build capabilities and you continuously innovate, right? In some cases, you should be thinking ahead in terms of the anticipated problems, right? To build and this software to solve these problems, right? So in this case, just partnering with software providers makes it easier to not only deploy at a pace to extract value in an agile way, but also helps you to and also makes it future ready in terms of making sure that you can actually get access to software, right, to solve these problems that are going to only continue to get more and more complex, right? So overall, it says CRO, from my perspective, I see no reason to build, and whether it's cost, whether it's speed, whether it's faster time to value, whether it's total cost of ownership, right? Even if you can do an ROI model, I think the build would be almost would be a non-starter internally, and it's, from our perspective, it's advisable to buy. On the other side, if I'm actually a larger CRO, right, I think larger CROs, they do have this core competency on the IT side, right, and again on the software engineering or software development side to build some of these capabilities. But again, from our perspective, right, if I'm a larger CRO, your core competency is to help sponsors with research, not about building software, right? So with that said, I think you might be able to do it because of the resources you have or you have access to. But at the end of the day, software engineering, especially data engineering and analytics, is a complex, from my perspective, a complex competency. And if you want to maximize your investment into a technology, whether it's building or buying, right? If you're a large CROs, you'd be achieving more ROI, right, when you're partnering, again, for all similar reasons I mentioned earlier, right? So when you're partnering with the software provider, from a software provider perspective, that's their core competency, right? The software provider has a lot of expertise in product development or product management, engineering, DevOps, and everything, right? And last but not least, if you're on the software provider side, you would be building software with a mindset to solve the industry problems in a standardized way, right? In an interoperable way, not as a closed systems. But if you actually are a CRO, you might end up building software, right, that's not extensible, that's not open, that's kind of closed, that would work only with your current infrastructure and current technology stack, which would be a big issue as you evolve, as you try to move towards more decentralized trials, as you try to collect more data, as you try to integrate with more systems. It could get quite complex, and the cost of maintenance and managing that would be significantly higher when compared to partner with software providers and buying software.
Recently, there have been some spin-offs of buy CROs of technology companies. How do you see that trend playing out?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to the point I was just talking about, right? So if you're a CRO, of course, you might, especially larger ones, you might have these resources to invest into R&D or IT, right? But at the same time, that's not your core competency. Your core competence, again, helping with research, right? So I talked a lot about the need to have this skill set with product and engineering and DevOps, AI and ML, data sciences, right? To build this modern advanced data platforms and data analytics capabilities. But at the same time, culture plays a huge role as well. So if you're a CRO, so your mindset might be more around from the financial perspective, right? Contribution margins, being efficient, right? And the culture would be around ensuring that you deliver consistently in a standardized way, right? So that the CRO is not only efficient from the financial perspective, but also it helps their clients. When you talk about building software, right, the mindset and the culture needs to be different. You need to be able to take risks. You need to be able to experiment. You need to be able to do rapid prototyping, right? And you need to be able to be patient in terms of getting results, especially when you're solving complex problems, right? So the culture and the mindset that's needed to building software is quite different. And that's one of the reasons why we might have seen some of these recent trends where if you have a software organization as part of CRO, they're spinning them off so that you can create better value. In these larger CROs have these business units operating independently rather than being operated under one umbrella. And like I said, the culture, the mindset that's needed, the approach in terms of execution needed are quite different. So of course, it's not to say that a services company cannot have software competencies, right? We do that, but again, it's just different. And I think what we have seen is by separating them out, they'll extract more value from each of these businesses rather than a combined business unit.
So Raj, before we conclude the podcast, any final insights you can share that you want to share with the audience that I didn't ask?
Yeah, thanks, Zach. And from my perspective, it's an incredibly exciting time for the industry. And I made a comment earlier in terms of how science has been groundbreaking. So we've seen for the first time the increased investments overall into science and technology now in our space. Our space is really humming right now, which is quite exciting to be part of. And in terms of the topic today, in terms of CROs, I believe CROs will continue to play a huge role to help sponsors reduce the cycle times, reduce the inefficiencies with R&D, and at the same time help the sponsor organizations bring therapies and treatments faster. I'm super excited in terms of some of the transformation initiatives that are going on across. You just touched about decentralized trials. There are a lot of other initiatives that are happening. I'm also super excited in terms of the opportunity advancements with AI and ML to automate and to expedite research. So overall, it's an incredibly exciting time for the industry. And if you are a CRO, I hope you recognize technology is a key enabler to help transform your businesses and also help the sponsor organizations to take advantage of these trends and implement valuable lessons we have learned over the past 18 months or so.
Raj, thank you for being a guest on the Pharma Podcast and sharing your insight. How can our listeners connect with you?
Yeah, so they can reach out to me on my email. It's rindupuri@eClinicalSol.com, and also I'm on LinkedIn. If you can search on Raj Indupuri eClinical Solutions, I should be on LinkedIn as well.
Thank you. Contact details for Raj are also available on our website at thepharmapodcast.ca. Thank you for listening. This episode of the Pharma Podcast also marks the end of Season 2. A huge thank you to our listeners for making the Pharma Podcast such a huge success. Season 3 will resume in September. The Pharma Podcast can be found on our website at thepharmapodcast.ca. The Pharma Podcast is also available to listen to for free on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and Google Podcast, and YouTube. Thank you to our sound engineer, Errol Francis. Please subscribe and follow me on LinkedIn to stay up to date on future podcasts. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast, or if there is a topic we should cover in future podcasts, please connect with me via LinkedIn.